Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, we're going to look at the newest documentary that is coming out on CBS on the dealing with the gravedigger's children. It's the first time that Chad Daybell's 5 children are breaking their silence. Now, Chad Daybell's kids, like Barry Morphew's daughters, still think their dad is innocent. When one of them was asked if Chad could be guilty of anything, the answer was, it's unthinkable. Clearly they haven't been thinking about what has happened, and if anything, they've unthought what has happened. This is a disturbing mirror to Chad and Lori doing what they did by unthinking the world. I mean, that is what doomsday is, the world undone, and unthinking the consequences to their own actions because of the world being undone, according to their beliefs. This unthinkingness is only possible in a vacuum of thinking, in a cult-like scenario where folks aren't going to question them. In other words, unthinking followers aren't going to think about what is happening. And I think some of the people that can be included in unthinking followers are one's own family members. So before we get to today's episode, for those following the Summer Wells case, I'll be letting you guys know at the end of this episode what is coming soon in terms of that. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So I am still gobsmacked that the Lori Vallow case isn't by far the most high-profile case in America. Right now, the Summer Wells case is pretty high profile. Well, this was 2 children that disappeared, not just one. And then on top of the 2 children that disappeared, there were sort of murders going on around that as well. There's Chad's wife, Tammy, that appears to have been murdered, and Lori's ex-husband, Charles, who appears to have been murdered. And then there's also Alex Cox. And Alex is going to make an interesting post-mortem appearance, I think, at trial, but we're going to talk about that in a moment. Now, I'm referring to an article that's just come out on CBS, and it is dealing with a new documentary that is going to air on the 1st, that's tomorrow. So I will put a link in the description, and as much as I'd love to play some of the sound bites in it, you guys can head to the link and listen to Chad's children kind of giving their assessment on their father and why they think he's innocent, why they think it's not a big deal that, the remains of 2 children were found on his property and he's a gravedigger. Now, one of Chad's children, Emma Murray, along with her sister Lee and brothers Seth, Mark, and Gary, they've only decided to break their silence now. It's been about two years since Tylee and JJ disappeared. 2 years. And now the lambs are making a noise. Now the lambs are speaking. And what are they saying? Well, that their father's innocent and also that he's been framed. And obviously they can't believe that he's guilty, because how would that reflect on them? Obviously, they can't believe that he's done anything wrong, because how would that reflect on them? And they can't seem to see, their mother dying and their father marrying someone else. Did he tell them about that? How does that play into everything? Well, they're not going to think about it. And so this is some of the problem when you have a case taking place and the lambs remain silent. Isn't somebody counting on that? And if the lambs don't stay silent, what happens to them? Why did Chad Daybell's lambs still survive the whole thing, whereas Lori's didn't? So going to the article, according to Emma, I think it was Emma who said that. She said, this is his property. If there's bodies buried here, it would be attributed to him. Well, that makes sense. But she says there's ample opportunity while the property was unattended during the day for someone to sneak on and secretly bury the remains. She points out that her father really went outside. Well, he did go to Hawaii and he was going to the beach when he was there. But she said that they thought it was absurd that he'd hide the children in his own backyard, saying there were plenty of remote places. Actually, it makes complete sense that someone would hide something like that on your own property, because you would have no control over that. You would want to remain, you would want to keep a kind of a custody, be able to maintain a vigil and be vigilant about who is coming close to these grave sites. And so you would actually want it in a kind of a controlled area, an area under your control, right? Even in the Chris Watts case, although it wasn't on his property, it was on a property that he would probably have regular access to, but most people wouldn't. The converse of that argument is, would somebody go onto someone else's property, in other words, trespass, and spend time there and risk being seen there, right? And then leave that property and then not know what is happening there? And the answer is no, usually not. There's also the intertextuality here of the Stephen Avery case, where you had a huge bonfire the night that Teresa Holbach went missing, and then her remains, the remains of her phone and very small artifacts, were found in a burn pit right behind Stephen Avery's home. Oh, no, someone actually planted it there. Oh, who? So I think it's easy to make the claim of being framed, but the person doing the framing is taking a huge risk to go to someone else's property and almost like wave a flag and say, hi, here I am digging, because digging takes quite a long time. Hi, here I am digging, here I am burning a fire. Oh, what are you doing? Well, you're going to get caught out, aren't you? It's actually very difficult to do that. And what they are alleging is that this was done in broad daylight, which to me is absurd. I do think they make a much better argument when they say this guy used to dig graves for a living, and the way these graves were dug is quite sort of kind of haphazard, quite clumsy. This doesn't look like the work of a professional gravedigger, does it? And what is being emphasized there is essentially the shallowness of each grave. That is why it's a rookie mistake. A gravedigger would never have done that. Now, I think what is, again, a little bit naive about this is, first of all, the fact that, in a normal grave scenario in a graveyard, a gravedigger has unlimited time. He's got a long time and he can, dig a grave in broad daylight, and there's nothing strange about that. But when it's a crime and it's surreptitious, you kind of want to do what you're doing quickly and get it over with and make sure that you're not seen. So you don't have unlimited time. I also think you've got to measure what is being said here about it being a rookie grave and a rookie mistake with the amount of effort that actually went into these graves. There were rocks that were placed in them. There were garbage bags that were used. So there was a certain amount of trouble that went into the disposal. In one case, even I think the incinerating of the remains. But I think the biggest thing is the fact that how long it took to actually find these graves shows that, well, no matter how shallow they were nevertheless, they did the job. And I think it was actually due to finding the SMSs that they found these graves, and the cell phone data. The GPS data is what led authorities to these sites, not the disturbed earth itself. In the article by CBS, there's an excellent rebuttal to this by investigative reporter and CBS News consultant Morgan Lowe, saying that somebody's prior experience as a gravedigger means that they wouldn't just sloppily bury someone in their own backyard, sort of discounts all of the psychological pressure that might be affecting somebody who's trying to do that. Absolutely right. So that was a quote from Morgan Lowe from CBS News, and there's another quote here, quote, Lowe has been covering this case since JJ and Tylee first went missing, and he says that although it's possible Chad could have been framed, as his children suggest, there's mounting evidence to say otherwise. And then he points to this cryptic text Chad sent appearing to explain one of the new graves. I'm going to get to that in a moment. One thing that I'm starting to pick up is I wonder whether the children coming forward, Chad Daybell's children coming forward now, bear in mind it's basically, this is happening kind of in September 2021. It's like just before the court process, the legal process for Chad is about to commence. There has been a delay announced, but I wonder whether this hasn't been kind of arranged, decided, discussed by Chad and his legal counsel, that this is part of a PR campaign. It's part of the apologia to set Chad up into his own trial. And the other thing that I think is interesting is who framed Chad? What is the legal case going to be for who framed Chad? Well, isn't it going to be Alex? Aren't they going to say that Alex tried to frame Chad? Alex had his reasons for doing whatever he did and did it to frame Chad. And isn't that giving us a sense of what to expect from this trial? And is Lori going to do the same? Is Lori going to say that her brother framed her as well, or that her brother's to blame for everything? And so it's going to be interesting to see. I don't know if it's rocket science, to consider the possibility of Chad throwing Alex under the bus, but the question is, will Lori go along with that? Now, to quickly touch on Lori right now is in a hospital for a mental health facility, and it's just been decided that she's going to spend another week there prior to possibly being released, because the judge wants to be sure that 48-year-old Lori is, whatever is going on with her, is she competent, isn't she? So she's 48 years old. She's been in the psychiatric hospital for 3 months under court order. And meanwhile, her case has been put on hold as well. And all of that, this whole to-do of Lori being in this mental health facility is in order to determine, is she competent to stand trial? And I'm pretty sure that she will be found competent. The question is, how long is it going to take? 3 months, 6 months, a year, or longer? Now, I want to touch on something I mentioned in the Summer Wells case, this whole idea of the silence of the lambs, right? At one point in this little excerpt provided by CBS, one of the children says, "My father needs someone to be a voice for him, to let him know what's real." It's August 2021, it's basically September. It's 2 years after the fact. These children went missing in early September 2019. Who has been a voice for them? I mean, not Lori. Lori's not been a voice for them. Chad's certainly not been a voice for them. Their father hasn't been around to be a voice for them because he was murdered. And so, if anything, the question's got to be asked, who has been a voice for all the victims? And it's quite a long list. Tammy, who's been a voice for her? Tylee, JJ, Charles. So I don't think it's a given that Chad buried anyone. So, that's the counter argument. I don't think it's a given that Chad buried anyone, but I do think it's likely that a gravedigger with graves on his own property dug graves. And bear in mind, there are other graves on his property that he did dig in terms of the pet cemetery, right? The question is, did Alex Cox dig them alone, or did he have help? So I don't really think it's, did Chad dig the graves, or did somebody else, or did Alex Cox dig it? I think it's, one's got to ask, was it Alex Cox and Chad? But here's a clue, and it's from this text sent by Chad at 11:53 on September 9th, 2019. Now, bear in mind what the children have said, that their father didn't really go out much. He was kind of like a homebody, or a dude that spent his time indoors, because he's an author, and I'm also an author, right? That doesn't mean you never go outside. And in terms of this text, Chad is admitting that he did go outside that day. He said, Well, I've had an interesting morning. I felt I should burn all of the limb debris by the fire pit before it got too soaked by the coming storm. So that's the first thing he's done. He's burnt something that day, right? Then while I did so, I spotted a big raccoon along the fence. That's also quite important to mention where he spotted it, along the fence, along the sort of the boundary area of the property, and he describes it as a big raccoon. So a small raccoon, I guess, wouldn't have taken so long to bury. He says, I hurried and got my gun, and he was still walking along. I got close enough that one shot did the trick. So he's also describing how many bullets were used in that particular incident. He is now in our pet cemetery, fun times, end quote. And that's also a word or an expression that Jodi Arias used at the end of a fake voicemail message to Travis Alexander. It wasn't exactly the same. I'll play it for you guys in a moment. But it's this idea of something that was actually horrific described in these sort of light-hearted terms.
And what else? Oh, and I drove 100 miles in the wrong direction. Over 100 miles, thank you very much. So yeah, remember New Mexico? It was a lot like that. Only you weren't here to prevent me from going into the 3 digits. So fun. Tell you all about that later.
In this message, Jodi Arias was also putting it on record that she drove a long distance, not knowing where she was, to potentially account for her movements on that day as well. Now, coming back to the intertextuality of the Lori Vallow case, just as in the Morphew case, here is an animal as a proxy for a person. I think the more troubling question is who shot Tylee? Tylee was last seen on September 9th, and JJ disappeared exactly 2 weeks later. Alex had a lot of experience shooting, and he shot Charles to death a few months earlier that same year. But Chad, in his own words, concedes to having and using and shooting his own gun on the critical day at a critical time. What do you guys think? So make sure you don't miss The Secret of Chad Daybell's Backyard. It's an all-new 48 hours airing on Wednesday, September 1st, that's tomorrow, on CBS and streaming on Paramount+. For those following the Summer Wells case, I'll be doing a live stream also on the 1st. I might deal with The Secrets of Chad Daybell's Backyard in a live stream after that, but that'll probably be on the 2nd. And then I'm also going to be doing the final episode in the Sermon on the Mount series, the conclusion. A lot of you have praised me and complimented me for, especially the last episode. So I want to thank you for that. Someone did mention that the Wells property, the house wasn't built by Don. Well, the answer is that he inherited the house and then he also built quite a large section onto it. So it's a combination of inherited and built on. In the live stream tomorrow, I will be talking a little bit about the timeline and has Grandma's timeline changed everything? So look out for that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.